I mean, the litmus test for me whenever I'm looking at whether a show's a good fit for Mercury is actually really simple. It's
Mm.
like, would I listen to it?
Mm.
There's
Yeah.
obviously some qualitative stuff that you have to think about. Is the
Yeah.
production value decent? Certain elements kind of up to the standard that we would be happy to represent. But also, like, am I just a fan of the show? Like, can I talk blindly to anyone who asks me on the spot about any of my podcasts and tell them what that show is about? And right now, still the answer is yes.
Hello, and welcome to Podbiz, the money behind the mic, a podcast about the business of podcasting. I'm Norma Jean Belinkie of NJB Media, a podcast audience development strategist.
And I'm John Kiernan of Podhouse Productions, an all-in-one podcast consultation and editing platform. We're co-hosts on this journey into the world of podcasting as a monetization tool.
Whether you're building branded content, scaling a podcast network, or you're just getting into the podcasting industry, Podbiz breaks down the strategies, tech, and mindset behind podcast success.
We're bringing you insider tips, real talk with industry professionals, strategies that actually work, and talking all about the things that we've seen in the trenches.
So if you're ready to go beyond the downloads and build real impact with your podcast,
then hit subscribe and let's get down to Podbiz.
Welcome to Podbiz. Today we're joined by Liam Heffernan, founder and CEO of the Mercury Podcast Network. We'll be speaking about what it takes to build an independent podcast network, his journey in terms of audio and taking other jobs on the side, what independent creators need to think about when they're joining a network, and Independent Podcast Day. Let's get down to Podbiz.
Hello. Do you know what? I have been a fan of this show for so long, so this feels like a moment to finally be on
We
it.
love it. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Podbiz is definitely, we're making waves. Absolutely. So as you know, let's get straight into it. Liam, where's the money in podcasting?
So to me, and maybe this will be a vague answer, but I'll get into it. For me, the money is in community. And what I mean by that is, let's take a hypothetical, right? If you're doing a podcast that gets like 2 million downloads a month, that sounds great, and you'll earn some nice programmatic from that, but it's really cheap. And let's say hypothetically that audience is perfectly evenly split. Say you're getting like 1,000 or say 10,000 downloads from each country around the world, and then you've got a perfectly 50% demographic split, male and age and everything. Fine, the nominal number of downloads is great, but how are you really going to sell that? Like, who's your audience? Like, who are you really speaking to? I think that's incredibly limiting when you're then thinking about, building a show and monetizing it. Whereas if you've got a show that really knows what it's about, knows who it's speaking to, and has a small niche audience, say like 20 to 50,000 a month,
Yeah.
I think there's so much more value in that in terms of the brands you can work with, the way you can build out that community and monetize that community. So I think downloads, I could go on a big tangent here, but downloads at face value are such a vanity metric because they only tell you a small part of the story. And that's where I think actually building a community around those downloads is where the real money is.
Building a community around your downloads is where the real money is. Absolutely agree. And I have to say, that's something that we've heard just, from a couple of different guests in terms of a little bit of that piece, right? We had Joe Fusigna come on, who's in terms of his business, it's really about memberships, right? And so he's all about creating those communities. And he mentioned that a lot of brands are now looking at really niche creators, right? And dedicated audiences. And then we've had a couple of execs on the ad side come on and say, hey, we're selling programmatic, and we also encourage our creators to have a multi-pronged strategy, right? I mean, programmatic is fantastic and we love it. And the technology is there, and it, ping pongs ads in near real time, server to server, right? We're living in the future. And also your community wants to hear directly from you. They're listening to your podcast for a reason. They're part of your community because they like what you're putting out and they want to support the brands that directly support your show. Absolutely.
I agree. And I think maybe that's where the difference is between podcasting and radio, or at least the sort of legacy radio of like 10, 15, 20 years ago, because radio, being an entirely commercial enterprise, was all about the numbers. You had to speak to as many people as possible. Nowadays, I just don't think that's as relevant. And you're right. I think brands want deeper connections with their audience via creators. And, that doesn't mean having the biggest audience. It just means having the right one.
I do think it's also something where nowadays the opportunity to segment and to target audiences is so much more available than it was 20 or 30 years ago, right? Like incredibly more. I mean, when we look at some of the demographics and on podcasting, we have a lot of ad folks come on and say that data is somewhat limited, in terms of podcasting audiences. But in general, like we're living in a world of seeing people's data. Obviously in Europe, we have GDPR. That's a little bit different. Brands and programmatic and a lot of targeting works differently within those parameters. For anybody wondering, GDPR is the European data privacy law. It's general data privacy restrictions, I think is what it stands for. But it is something where in the age that we're in, with the way that advertising tech can niche down and target specific demographics, for better or for worse, brands have an opportunity to really connect with people who want their stuff, right? Who want their products and services. And I think it's something where a lot of the time when we think about advertising, people get a little bit of like, oh, I don't want to be sold to. But when someone's selling you the right thing, yes, you do.
Well, I agree. And I think we take for granted as podcasters just how granular we can actually get into the data. 10 years ago, even the big legacy media companies would have spent an absolute fortune getting the sort of data that now we can just go onto like Podscribe and get all of that stuff in 5 minutes, right? Like we're in an amazing time where actually having access to that level of information about your listener democratizes the whole thing.
Absolutely. And I do think that, like you said, it's community, it's a combination. So it's making sure that those people are served by brands that want to support your show. And also that, if you have additional inventory, it's able to target people that aren't put off by it. I think that that's super, super important as well. So in terms of monetization, I want to talk about that a little bit more because obviously that's what the show's about. But you also have a very interesting journey like we all do, right? Where the industry is young enough that nobody has started out in podcasting. So tell us a little bit about how you got into the podcasting industry.
I mean, I think like most people, certainly most people my age, we started through these very traditional career paths of, I mean, for me, it was, I went to uni from there, because I was doing media, I was encouraged to check out the local hospital radio station. And for anyone that's not in the UK, hospital radio are like these charities that they're essentially fully fledged like sort of radio stations that operate as non-profits that sit within the grounds of hospitals, and they serve this super local audience. But they're like the springboard for people who want to get into the audio industry. And student radio as well. I did my time there. And then from there, it went to working for a year or so at the BBC in local radio. And then, life happened. I had to work in a bank for a bit and, bills needed paying. And
we have all had career pivots. I got to say, we're a young enough industry that everybody's had an odd job here and there. Absolutely. Or, a career where they had really stable income while they were building up their podcasting career.
Yeah. And, there's a lot to be said for just having a nice, reliable job and a stable income. Some days I go to sleep dreaming of those days.
Yeah. And I do have to say, if you haven't had that for a long time, and not to glamorize a steady paycheck, I do think it's something where if you've done a lot of creative things, or if you're kind of, coming up in your life in terms of, your career, having a stable income for a few years, the rest of your life gets to kind of level up, and then you can reassess. So I definitely am not one of those people who's like, chase your dreams, eat ramen noodles forever. Because I think that it is something where, let's all be realistic here. When your nervous system is a little bit more calm because you have financial security, the rest of your needs can get met, and then you can reassess from a better place. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm grateful that those years working in finance gave me not a great income, but a good enough one that my wife and I could get a house, do those like life things, and settle. And when the opportunity came up to then go back into audio, and as it turned out into podcasting, I guess having that extra little bit of financial stability meant that I could take that little risk, because we are in a risky industry. There's a lot of volatility. I mean, last year particularly, the number of sort of mergers and acquisitions and then layoffs as a result of that, of companies streamlining. it's a tough industry to be in.
And every single, layoff announcement, that's a lot of people whose lives are affected, right? I mean, obviously your heart goes out to the people that it happened to. And then you're on LinkedIn and you're like, this is not fun to read. This is a carnage of everybody trying to be positive.
Yeah. And I think on the whole, we're in such an amazingly supportive and collaborative industry.
Absolutely.
And we see that in those tough times when people need help and need a bit of support.
Every time I've gone through a transition, the amount of people who've reached out and said, hey, if there's anybody on my LinkedIn that you'd like an intro to, I've done that for other people.
Yeah.
In podcasting, I think even because we're such a young industry, no matter what role you're in, people are constantly looking out for you once you're kind of clear, I guess, that you're a podcaster.
Podbiz is brought to you by Lean and Loaf, our video podcast partner. Because running a podcast is so much work outside of just recording a podcast.
Lean and Loaf handles our entire post-production pipeline, getting everything platform ready. That way we're not chasing files or managing editing timelines every week.
We really recommend Lean and Loaf. It's been phenomenal. We're a 2-man team. And so for us, it's been fantastic to have the additional support to focus on the content of the show and the incredible guests we've had on.
And really get down to answering the question that you want to know the answer to. Where is the money in podcasting?
Lean and Loaf is trusted by some of the biggest names in the podcasting industry. So we're in really good company with folks like iHeart, HBO, and Netflix.
If you want to take a load off and take your podcast to the next level, head on over to leanandloaf.com.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's almost this sort of rite of passage that you have to sort of earn your stripes in our industry and kind of prove that you care enough, because I think there are.
That's
the
thing. I do have to say, I don't think it actually has to do, I think it does have to do with competence and people's knowledge base, but I also think it actually has to do with like the heart, how dedicated are you? And I think a lot of the folks that I know in podcasting that have been the most supportive are almost like subconsciously, like, how enthusiastic is this person? It's like, are you in? I'm in. Okay, you're in. Here we go.
Yeah, totally. But, I do think also like the way that this industry has been, I think is a sign of the growth of podcasting. And unfortunately, like the downside to podcasting getting so big so quickly is that, these big companies, invest in an awful lot of growth very quickly, and sometimes certain things don't pan out. Sometimes when the industry contracts a little bit, people then need to get laid off, and it's a real shame that's the way it is. But I think it's an indication of just how quickly our industry is evolving and changing, and I'm hoping that we're now at a point where the systems are in place, the infrastructure is in place around our industry, that we kind of know how things work, and I think now it's going to support that growth in a slightly more sustainable way, I hope.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love what you said, and I also think that in terms of a lot of larger companies investing heavily into people, it may not be sustainable long term, right? It may be exploratory budget or budget that, they think will work. And at the same time, even if things don't last forever, it's given somebody the next job in their career. I think that that's a really important distinction. And I do also think, in terms of how a lot of larger companies operate, sometimes it's just about interest rates, right? It's not personal at all, but it is something where I think a lot of people have had the opportunity to do a lot of different things as a result. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. And I think we've all just spent the last few years sort of in and out of different jobs. The nature of our industry is I think you have to be quite adaptable and quite fluid and go where the opportunities are. And sometimes you discover things that you maybe never would have chosen to do. But hey, I think we're all learning every day. And I will just caveat one thing that I've now learned as someone who runs a network and has had the pleasure of speaking to many other people who are running networks and sort of maybe higher up the industry pecking order, is that actually, spoiler alert, nobody really knows what they're doing, right?
Nobody knows what they're doing. That has been a huge theme here on Podbiz. Everybody thinks everyone else knows what they're doing, and then they're in the industry for a couple of years and they look around and they're like, cool. So no one knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And I think we're all just guessing. We're all
just guessing, but that at the same time, that gives everybody the impetus to create the kind of work and the kind of companies that they want, right? That's also why we started Podbiz, because we wanted transparent conversations around monetization within the industry. We weren't seeing it, and we're like, okay, we're going to make it. Right? We know enough people that are willing to have those conversations with us. We're going to make this show. Yeah. And it also sounds like that's what you did with Mercury.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, there was certainly a rationale with Mercury, and that rationale was that, as a producer myself, I saw this gap in the industry where,
Mm-hmm.
there was an awful lot of fantastic shows and creators who were doing amazing stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and they deserve to have that support, that opportunity to scale up and grow and monetize, but
Yeah.
they weren't big enough to get the attention of the big networks. And even if they did end up on one of those networks, they were so far down the
They'd be such
priority
a
list.
small fish.
Yeah,
Right.
right. So we wanted to build something that was designed to support those shows,
Mm.
not just as a stepping stone for us to then become a bigger network, but
Mm-hmm.
long term, because I believe, and I guess the jury's still out. Maybe it's optimistic, maybe it's not. That there is a way to build a network like that and keep it in that space long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're also seeing like I said, it's still early days for our industry, of course, but we're also seeing that there are many different tiers of monetization, right? And there's only 2 podcasts that are going to be Joe Rogan and Call Her Daddy, right? And those are those podcasts,
Yeah.
right? And so everybody else may have success. It just looks different. Right? Maybe it means, hey, I get to quit my day job. Maybe it means, hey, I get to take my family on this really great vacation because I've got this hobby that gives me a bit of extra cash.
Yeah.
And people love it and people want to support it, but it doesn't have to be their entire professional identity.
Yeah.
And I think that you've done a phenomenal job of doing that. You guys have quite a few shows at this point, and you've been around for, gosh, I want to say like almost, it hasn't been that long. I want to say almost 2 years, which is nothing.
Yeah, I mean, we're creeping up towards a year and a half now.
Okay.
It feels like we've done a lot in that first year, and we hands up, we're a startup. Obviously we're not making the sort of money that the big networks are making, but our focus in year one was building that sort of brand value, because as a network, that's what allows us to create the leverage for our shows, is ensuring that we're seen to be as credible and as valuable a brand as any other network. That's what's going to make us build those relationships with the agencies and with the advertisers, that then unlocks the sort of potential for all of our shows that the big networks are doing for theirs.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the strengths of networks for everybody out there listening is it basically just kind of combines all of your downloads into one big ad buy, right? So let's say, instead of one show that has 2 million a month, like you were saying, you have 20, that have 100,000 a month, approximate. And then you have collective buying power, in terms of some of those larger ad buys that smaller creators really in the past haven't had the same opportunity to participate in.
Yeah, and I think this is one of my biggest gripes. When I first started Mercury, I had a bit of a bee in my bonnet about the fact that all of these big networks are sort of fighting over the top 1% of shows, which I get. Like they're the shows that have the most commercial potential because they're doing the most downloads, but also they're doing the most downloads, which means they could just do this themselves, like hire a salesperson. Like, don't give a cut of your downloads to a network.
Who has time for that? Like, I'm so sorry, but nobody, or I'm sorry, maybe 1 or 2 people in the history of podcasts have gotten into podcasting to learn how to sell podcast ads. That is not high on the priority list.
But if you're doing millions of downloads a month, right? Like, why give away a big cut of your ad revenue to a network?
It's not even a cut of your ad revenue. It's those relationships. It's knowing the technology. It's the ad insertion. At some point, it becomes a whole other job. And if you're focused on making great content, you actually can't do both sustainably.
I do agree, but I think that shows that then get that big, I struggle to really see where the kind of net benefit is in being part of a network versus just going solo, apart from, I guess, as you're sort of alluding to, just not having to worry about doing all that stuff, which I guess is
no, it's not knowing how. It's not having the access.
Well, true, but I mean, you could hire someone with the skill set and the contacts.
But I mean, at this point, it's interesting, right? When you get into economies of scale, at some point, maybe you could spend $500,000 to set up an office and hire staff. But at the same time, It's like in the US, they have what's called a family office. And it's like when your businesses get too big to hire an accounting firm, you set up your own office for your family and you hire your own family accountant and lawyer and all those kind of things. So, I don't know a lot of podcasters that are really keen to do that. If
I get that.
Especially if a lot of these larger companies have that infrastructure built in and make it just directly easy, and a lot of the big ones, of course, have minimum guarantees, very large contracts. But I do think in terms of that mid-range podcaster, they're very underserved. And what you've built is really a testament to those indie voices as well.
Thank you. Yeah. And I guess that's sort of my point really is that, the shows that need the support of the networks that can benefit the most from a network are often the shows that kind of get a bit forgotten, like those kind of mid-range great indies that have potential, but they're not doing the sort of 7-figure numbers.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where we're really trying to serve the market. And I don't really see us as competition to all these huge networks, because even if they have shows that would be a great fit on Mercury, I don't think they're serving them in the same way that we would.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think for any creator out there, it can be really intimidating, right? First of all, putting any value on a creative piece of work that you make is incredibly intimidating. Right. And most people don't have any experience in directly advocating for themselves monetarily, right? In terms of their creative output. Like that is like just straight off the bat. It's like, oh, I'd rather go to the dentist. And I do think a lot of those mid-range creators are people who aren't going into it like, I'm going to start a media empire. And so there is even more of I'm doing it for the love of the art. I'm doing it for the love of my podcast.
Completely. And I think as well, the biggest pain point of these kind of mid-range indie creators, it's not the content, it's the time, it's the money, it's the energy, because, these people are one-person shows. They're doing everything. And they're simply that they're maxed out. Like, given the opportunity, if they were able to have some of that work taken off them, handled by someone else, and they had that extra headspace to think about growing their show, they had the time to do it, then I think that there's almost limitless potential to what some of these shows could become. They're hindered simply by time.
Yeah. I mean, time is the ultimate limited resource. It's the only one of the few that I guess we can't buy more of.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, Liam, it's very interesting, right? So with Mercury, you have your slate of shows, which is, I think, between 25 and 30. There's obviously some familiar names in there. Alice Florence Orr, who's been one of our guests here on Podbiz. Her show, Second Helpings, is with you guys.
Yep.
You have some true crime. You have some kids podcasts, which, have their own monetization challenges. It's just a really nice kind of group of shows. I would say, just looking at your slate, is there one common theme that really ties the kind of content that you work with together? I
mean, the litmus test for me whenever I'm looking at whether a show's a good fit for Mercury is actually really simple. It's like, would I listen to it? There's obviously some qualitative stuff that you have to think about. Is the production value decent? Certain elements kind of up to the standard that we would be happy to represent. But also, like, am I just a fan of the show? Like, can I talk blindly to anyone who asks me on the spot about any of my podcasts and tell them what that show is about? And right now, still the answer is yes.
I love that. I think that's a great litmus test. And I think that really speaks to, we get to build podcasting businesses on our own terms, right? And eventually, right, you will have to have different standards in terms of bringing on shows, or define that standard a little bit more clearly. But it is something that's super interesting. And for everybody out there listening, because you are launching another product, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but what would you say is the minimum monthly downloads of a show that you would want to have on the network? Because, a lot of ad agencies have come on and, you're hearing numbers like 50K a month and things like that. So from a network perspective, especially because you guys are really a home for indie podcasts, what would you say is a reasonable entry number of downloads per month that we're looking at if somebody wants to end up on an indie network that kind of, really stands on those shows?
So for us, the exact size of show that we're looking for at any one time does change, because for me it's about making sure that we have a fairly healthy ratio of big shows that are at the point where they just need to monetize, and our job is to just help them, bring in as much as possible.
Yeah.
Versus, smaller shows who actually just need a bit of support with the growth, with the promotion, with that kind of heavy lift of just finding an audience and getting to that point where they can monetize. So there's never really been a fixed like download floor for Mercury. Obviously, we have to think about creating
the bottom
a
line
business, of course.
Yeah.
And so, we're at 400K a month downloads. To me, that feels like a comfortable kind of baseline to build from. And ultimately, as Mercury grows, our job is to sort of support those smaller shows that we can grow a bit more organically, so that naturally, our downloads increase because we're helping the smaller shows get bigger. But there is, of course, a baseline at which point, you're just basically, a charity. And I think, we're a year old now. We have to start thinking about, how do we make commercially viable business decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Liam, tell us about Independent Podcast Day.
Yes. So, Mercury is all about representing, supporting, championing independent podcasts. And it just felt like a bit of a no-brainer that we would reclaim July 4th because I'm British as well. Why not?
I was wondering why you guys picked July 4th. I was like, is it because it's about independence? Wait, you're British. Wait, what is this, some sort of like reverse Boston Tea Party?
Yeah, it became just a bit of a... I'll tell you the backstory. So myself and Matt, who's our commercial lead, if you're at the podcast show, I'm sure you heard him. We were sat in a pub a couple of months ago and, talking about game planning for, the future and that. And we were talking about Independence Day in America, and it was literally just a play on word. It was like, okay, what if like Independence Day was actually like Independence Day? And then we kind of, maybe it's because we were like a beer in, but we were like, do you know what? There's something in this. And so we put some
this idea sounds great. This beer tastes great too.
Exactly. But do you know what? As we sort of fleshed out the idea, we thought, there are days like International Podcast Day in September.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which are amazing initiatives.
Yeah.
But there's nothing really that just is dedicated to supporting independent podcasters. And the challenges of making stuff independently are unique. And we thought Mercury was really the best network to kind of lead that charge and create a day where we can showcase the challenges, the achievements, the success stories of people that have just grafted and worked and made their shows and their content for no other reason than that they just love what they do. And that to me is the foundation of our industry. It always will be. And we wanted to celebrate that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I do think it's fun, right? As a British company to kind of have a bit of a cheeky play on words for US Independence Day. But I do think that there are so many independent podcasters out there who really feel like a small fish. And it's such a way to say, hey, happy Independent Podcast Day. Like, this is my show and this is what I'm promoting. And, we're very excited at PodBiz. We've come on as a media partner and we're just so excited to share that kind of work because I think, within podcasting, even a lot of the companies that are dealing with very large creators that have teams and budget and, entire production staff, it is something where they're all still champions of, hey, did you hear this amazing show? One guy makes it in his basement. You got to listen. Yeah.
And I think that's because, as an industry, all of those people, not long ago, they were independent.
They were in the basement.
Yeah, exactly. I always remember the podcast show a few years ago when Hannah and Sruti from Red Handed were talking about their story and, just how they essentially, started recording in like a cupboard. And I think every show, no matter how big they are, has a story like that of how they started out. And maybe it's not the same podcast, but it was certainly a podcast. And we're just, I guess, trying to remind everyone of what that is. And I think by the time this episode goes out, we would have announced a really awesome sort of giveaway. We're putting together this kind of goodie bag for independent podcasters. We've got the likes of Nemono and True Fans on board, and I'm hoping Audio UK. I'm hoping they've come through. And we're working with a few other partners as well. So this isn't just about us creating a website and saying, hey, look at this. We're trying to do something that creates some meaningful value. And, partly it's through
like, hey, you're an indie. You maybe can't afford Namano, which is a huge investment. Big fans of Namano. They created a unit to help you capture spatial audio. We really, if anybody doesn't know what that is, that's what that is. It's a microphone unit that has like 4 different microphones on it, so you can capture audio out in the field. It's very, very cool. And I do think, when you're in India, when you're on your own and you're self-funding, you're like, oh gosh, I would love free hosting, right?
That's it.
I'd love a really nice mic setup. I think that that's important. And I do think that it's something where the podcasting industry is small. And for some of us that know a lot of people, it's easy to kind of say, okay, let's put together some prizes. But for the independent podcaster who maybe hasn't even scrapped together money to come to a conference or anything like that, it's a very big deal to get that kind of support.
Exactly. And I think it really means something to me to sort of try and pay that forward, because I'm talking now into a Shure MV7. This microphone is, I think it must be about 4 years old now. I got this as a gift from someone who I was doing some work for, and I say it was a gift, it was to help me do some work for them.
Yeah.
But they got me the mic, and I never would have been able to afford an MV7 at the time that they gave it to me.
Yeah.
So, and
having the right tools is hard.
Yeah.
And, we always say you can start, in a minute, or you can start a podcast in an hour. But I do think that when you want to take yourself seriously, it helps to have great gear that you know how to use.
Absolutely. And, we talk a lot about like monetization, but actually, let's pivot and think about the investment that's needed to actually get started, right? Like the baseline now is so high, and that's a testament to how awesome, even independent creators are now. But when that standard keeps going up, the expectations go up, and suddenly you can't just turn on your laptop built-in mic and talk into it and call it a podcast anymore. You need to invest in decent kit and the software and the tools to match the sort of level that listeners expect. And now that does require a not insignificant investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Liam, what would you say is one key move or metric or even a mindset that's made the biggest impact on your podcasting career and, some of the projects you've worked on and some of the shows that you guys work with at Mercury?
So, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I came from a second life in banking, and, the mindset shift, because when you work in finance, it's all about the numbers, right? And I was an analyst as well. My job was tell people how much money the bank has, right? So it was tough pivoting from that to an industry where I actually think it's quite detrimental to think numbers first, to think about things in terms of, how much money could this make? I think when you approach making a podcast or any content like that, you're setting yourself up to fail, because when you think about how to make the most money, what you're really thinking about is how to speak to everyone and no one at the same time. Making great content and making great podcasts is about really understanding why you want to do it and who you're speaking to. The monetization, although it feels a bit counterintuitive, will happen naturally and so much easier.
I mean, look, it's chicken or egg, audience or monetization. The worst thing you can do is monetize too early. And the second worst thing you can do is alienate your audience. Which are kind of the same thing, right? And, I think a lot of podcasters are really careful in terms of being a steward of that audience and just making sure that they don't oversaturate or turn anybody off. And, brands are the same, and when you talk to ad folks, they really want to be the steward of the brand's dollars. And so I think, when we talk about creators, they really are the stewards of their audience's attention.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've said to many people in sort of how I've built Mercury that, the success and sort of the monetization of our network is relational, not transactional. And, that's why in our first year, I had bills to pay, but I wanted to focus on building something that felt meaningful, that felt valuable, because, long term, that's where the money is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Liam, what's something that people don't know about what you do?
I don't know if this is something that everyone doesn't know, but I'll speak to the perhaps, majority of your listeners who don't run their own business. And that is that running a podcast network is probably like 99% anything but actually podcasting or anything about podcasting.
Yeah.
And podcasting is actually really not very glamorous, right?
No,
when you start thinking about how to make it work, it's a tough industry to be in.
Yeah.
And I think I now spend most of my time just thinking about like business admin. I speak to my accountant way more than I actually want to. But I think that's part of creating something that's going to, I guess, be sustainable. And for me, I guess it's call it a little bit of self-sacrifice. I love making podcasts, but Mercury is all about helping other people make their stuff as great as possible. And actually taking a little bit of a backseat to help them do that. But you don't see that, and I guess I'm not going to sit on LinkedIn talking about, oh man, I only got like 3 hours sleep last night. But it's a big part of the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, for everybody listening who works within the podcasting industry, anytime you say that, people are like, oh, what podcast do you make? And you got to be like, no, I have a network and, I represent other shows and we do collective buying with big agencies. I mean, when I tell people I have a podcast, they're like, wow, I'm like, I'm going to tell you what it is. Before I tell you, if you are not in the podcasting industry, you are under no obligation to pretend you're excited. And they're like, you're being pessimistic. That's what? Why would you say that? And then I'm like, I have a podcast on podcast monetization. And then they're like, oh, no. I mean, it's just...
I tell people that, that aren't in podcasts, like friends and family, that I run a podcast network, and I dread them actually taking an interest and asking what that means, because I don't know how to explain that in a way.
At
that
least
people
the word network's
understand.
in there. At least you got network going for you.
Like some people, I still have a few older relatives who barely even know what a podcast is. So trying to explain to them what I do for a living is impossible.
No. Yeah. I think for a lot of us out there, it's like, I think Ariel Nissenblatt talks about this, right? Like a podcast of people's boomer parents just explaining what they do. when like if your kids work in, I think she's had a tweet or an X post go viral about something like that. So shout out to Ariel who's been on the show as well.
Yeah.
Well, Liam, tell us about Orbit.
Yes. So Orbit is the sister network to Mercury, and really the whole reason it came about was as we built up Mercury over the last year, we realized that we'd built this sort of infrastructure around what we do. We have access to an enterprise level hosting platform. We can plug any of our shows into the ad marketplace. We have these sort of network level kind of promotional opportunities. And then it just sort of dawned on me, well, why don't we just offer that to everyone? And I double checked all the contracts and the things I do just to make sure that it was actually possible, because no one else was doing it. But
right. That's one of those things where you're like, is there a reason no one else is doing this?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So,
wait a minute. Is this a good idea or
just an illegal one? Right. I looked into it. I think it's legal. And essentially what we're just saying to anyone who wants it is, hey, like, come on over, like, use our platform, join Orbit, and you can have a lot of these benefits of being in a network, like access to an ad marketplace. Unless you're getting like 5 figures a month in downloads, you haven't even got a chance of accessing that. Well, you can with us. So, okay, you're not going to get the real personalized support that we give that small cohort of Mercury shows.
Those networks, the marketplaces, they exist on some of the other hosting platforms for sure.
Yeah. And our thinking with Orbit is, okay, well, just for like £10 a month or, like $12 a month, you can use our platform. You can have access to an ad marketplace. You can get some cross promotion. We can even pass down campaigns that we're bringing into Mercury if you're a good fit for it. So for us, it's building that ecosystem of independent podcasters, and Orbit is a way for us to say, look, come on over. You can save money. You can even earn money, and we'll help you maybe find a bit more of an audience as well. And, for us long term, building that relationship with those podcasters through Orbit means that we can see how they're performing, we can see what they're doing, and we can make smarter decisions about the shows that we think we can then support on Mercury. So for us, it's like it's a whole end-to-end thing. We're trying to connect the dots in the industry and actually make the lives of independent podcasters cheaper, easier, and better.
Yeah, absolutely. And that feature is built in on several hosting platforms, but I think for a network to do it is really revolutionary, because you guys are already going out there and actively negotiating those advertising contracts. Absolutely. Well, Liam, what's an example of something you did with Mercury that really worked? Walk us through it.
I'm actually gonna use an example that is still probably in progress. So maybe this will be
life is in progress.
Exactly right. So we realized last year that we were supporting some smaller shows, and we love those shows, But we were doing it in such a linear way. We were thinking like purely podcast ads, and representation beyond that really didn't exist for us. But then we started talking to Ray Review, who's one of our podcasters. She's a TikTok and sort of true crime influencer. And she had a podcast, but it wasn't really doing anything. So we kind of helped her breathe a bit of life into it and kind of relaunch it a bit in January. And that was great because we found that there was an audience there, that she could sustain that audience and actually start monetizing a bit from her podcast. Now, I guess we're going sort of next level, kind of 2.0 in our approach, because we're working with Ray on giving that podcast a whole new look, a whole identity, but working with a cross-platform, across her social channels, her YouTube, to create this like full synergy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really big trend within podcasting. So many creator adjacent teams are saying, look, maybe the podcast is your central media product, but we want to support the media products that you have and that monetization as well. Absolutely. Yeah, good call.
And we're excited to be like unveiling all of this over the next month on Ray's channels. But what's been really exciting for us is being able to really put in that time with Ray and work really closely. We're not just taking all of her assets and distributing it. We're building those assets with her. You know, we've been creatively so involved in the branding and the artwork and all the other assets and building all of this with her. That's incredibly rewarding for us, but we're already starting to see the payoff. I mean, I can't name names, but we're starting to field this commercially to see what the interest is, because Ray has nearly 2 million social followers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think in the past it's been really hard for creators who have a big social presence to bring that over to podcasting. But I think working with podcasting teams is the future, right?
Absolutely.
Is helpful to get it off the ground, to help you market your podcast so that your long form consumption audience stays.
Yes. And this is something I've been saying to every creator that I've spoken to. They always ask, what they expect to get in podcast listeners. And my answer is always the same. Like, don't get your hopes up, because conversion from social to podcasts is always going to be less than you think. Actually thinking about the funnel the other way round, using the podcast as a way for people to discover you, to then get to your socials, creating content via the podcast that you can repurpose on social channels, and thinking about your whole brand and how you build that kind of content universe around, all of your channels. That's the way to look at it. And I think that there are some creators who have really done this very well. And I would actually give a shout out to Insanity. They're a UK-based talent agency. And I think what they realized, perhaps before most other people, is that actually now the line between talent representation and podcast network is so increasingly blurred that I think we're entering an era where they're going to be one and the same.
Absolutely. Well said. And we're seeing it, you're not the only one to say that here on PodBiz. So it's definitely, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Liam, what's something that didn't go to plan and what did you learn from it?
Oh, do you know what? I've never spoken about this before, but I will, because, hey, we're all friends here and we're all in the business of podcasting. When we started Mercury, we had a great show from day one. It was a big show. They were doing sort of mid 6-figure sort of downloads a month. Really loved working with them. And actually, they were one of the reasons why we were able to give the network, a nice boost right from the start. But I think I fell into, I guess, the same trap that every entrepreneur falls into, right? Sometimes you gotta take the opportunities when you can see them. And in this case, it just turned out that it was a learning curve, because we realized that we weren't actually set up from day one to support the needs of a show of that size.
Yeah.
I think we've addressed that a lot now.
But I mean, we've had, like Heather Osgood came on and she said some of those large campaigns are 18 months out, right? So you get the creator, they've got, mid 6 figures, that's 500,000 downloads a month, right? For one single creator. And, they're looking for maybe a bigger brand or a larger percentage of programmatic ad fill. And like, it takes a long time to get those deals. And so having that volume is absolutely.
And there's definitely like an expectation management piece there, because, as a network, for me, it was like, great, like, let's try and make this work. And we did try and make it work. But as you say, the relationships that still need to be developed, the lead times of getting these campaigns in meant that actually, I just don't think it was actually plausible for us to be able to support them in the way that they expected. And ultimately, it didn't work out, and that's fine. That we don't put fixed terms on our agreements for that reason. If we're not giving podcasters the value they expect, they can leave. And in that case, it was true. And for me, that was a real shame. But I think it helped me to really define what Mercury was about at day one, and what we need to do to get not just where we are today, but where we're going to go in the next 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's one of those things where everybody's going to have setbacks, always, right? And it's always just what we learned from it. Yeah. And I think it's something where when you're starting a podcast network, right, just from the ground up, that's going to be something where, a lot of businesses fail because they grow too big too soon. Yeah. Absolutely.
And you know what? Like, I don't have any regrets over that because
no.
This was. I think if they were a show that we'd aggressively poached from another network, I would have felt incredibly guilty that we weren't maybe able to deliver in the way that they would have expected us to.
Yeah.
But in this case, this was a show that was doing those sorts of numbers, but they weren't even monetizing. So what we at least helped them to do from day one was
to understand that they can make money.
Exactly. And we actually did. We were putting 4 figures in their pockets every month. It just wasn't, I think once they realized the commercial potential, I think then it became clear that we maybe weren't ready from day one to deliver what they needed. But we were able to start that journey for them. And I'm really proud of that. And I think ultimately we all kind of benefited. And I think they're doing really well now. And that's great. And
Absolutely. Well, Liam, if you had to start over today, what would you do differently to grow faster or smarter?
Win the lottery, I think, if I could.
I'll take that answer.
It's, you can, however much money you think you need to sort of make something work, I don't think it's ever enough, right? There's always so much you want to do and so much you can do. And, in an ideal world, we'd have had a lot more money with Mercury rather than just, Mercury up to now has been financed entirely by what I've personally put into the business. And I'm very proud of the extraordinary amount we've achieved with that. But
without taking investment or seeking investment, that's so much work.
Yeah. And, I'm really proud of that. But if I could start again and I could have a bigger pot to launch with, then I'd take it. Because I think in hindsight, there's certain things that I think have been more challenging than I would have liked them to be, because we've been bootstrapping, we've been building something literally from the ground up. If I feel a few grey hairs coming because of that. And if I could have saved myself that, I would have done.
Absolutely. Well, Liam Heffernan, founder and CEO of the Mercury Podcast Network. What are you most excited about coming up within the podcasting industry?
I mean, I know this is a divisive answer perhaps, but I do think video presents an awful lot of opportunities. I'm not a video first guy. I don't believe that podcasting is video. I think podcasting is an audio first medium.
Yeah, same.
But I think what we're starting to see is the industry embrace the potential of video, not just as a replacement to audio first, but as a sort of expansion of that.
Yeah, and that's how I think of it, as like an expansion and an augmentation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
it's like we've reached just a new level. Yeah,
absolutely. And the content potential with that, thinking about, podcasts are not just a single experience anymore. They're building communities, they're building brands, and that is multi-platform. It's multi-sensory. It's not just in your ears, it's in your eyes now. And, I think we have to embrace video in that respect. And I think there are some huge opportunities there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Liam Heffernan, founder and CEO of the Mercury Podcast Network. Thanks so much for joining us here on PodBiz.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.